Hey everyone, and welcome to this deep dive where we're going to be tackling something that could really shake things up. Here in the US, the possibility of a US sovereign wealth fund, like a
Yeah.
giant government investment account. We're talking potential economic ripples, investment shifts, maybe even changes to your Uber rides. We'll unpack how this complex topic could directly affect you. So, first things first, what exactly are these sovereign wealth funds?
Think of it as like a country setting up a massive pool of money,
Right.
often extra cash they have, and using it to invest for the long haul.
Okay, so like on a national scale, are there any countries already doing this?
Absolutely. Norway's got the biggest one out there.
Yeah.
Worth a mind-blowing $1.7 trillion. They've got their fingers in all sorts of pies.
Yeah.
Stocks, real estate, you name it. They're even big on renewable energy.
1.7 trillion. Okay, Norway's clearly onto something. But hold on, isn't the US kind of drowning in debt? Where would we even get the money to start something like that?
Yeah, you've hit on a key difference. Many countries with these funds, like Norway, run budget surpluses. They have extra money after paying their bills. The U.S., not so much.
So no digging through the couch cushions.
Mm.
For spare change, what's the plan then?
Well, the idea is to monetize assets, as the Treasury Secretary put
And
down.
monetize assets. So are they talking about selling off government stuff?
Exactly. Think federal land, maybe some.
Yeah.
Empty government buildings. The idea is to get a big chunk of cash up front to kickstart the fund.
So they'd be trading one asset like land for another, hopefully a more profitable one,
Well-
through investments. Got it. But what about all this talk about using tariffs? How do those fit in?
That's where things get a little fuzzy. The plan is to use tariff revenue for the fund, but also to fund potential tax breaks. It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep changing.
That's a puzzle I don't think I'd want to solve. So we've got this
Right.
potential pile of money, but I'm still not clear how it affects me. What's the connection?
Let's look at Saudi Arabia's sovereign wealth fund for a second. They've poured money into companies like Lucid, the electric car maker, Activision, the video game giant, even Uber.
Wait, Saudi Arabia owns a piece of Uber, so every time I use the app, I'm indirectly supporting their wealth fund. That's kind of wild.
In a way, yes. And it highlights how these investments can really impact a company's value. When a sovereign wealth fund puts in big bucks, it can drive up demand, pushing up the price of things like stocks.
So if I have investments, this could actually be good news.
Potentially, yes. If the U.S. follows a similar strategy, it could give certain parts of the market a boost, which could benefit investors. And if you're not already an investor, well, maybe this is a sign to start thinking about it.
This all sounds great, but there's always a catch, right? What are the risks here?
Of course, risk is part of any investment. For individual investors, there's always the chance of market crashes, recessions, or even companies going belly up.
Okay, that's the usual stuff. But is there anything specific to the government doing this? That I should be worried about.
There's a big one. What if the government makes some bad calls and their investments tank, especially with the U.S. already carrying
Yeah.
so much debt? The consequences are a bit of mystery.
So it's not just individual investors who are taking a gamble. The government's got skin in the game too.
Exactly. And here's the thing. If the government starts losing money, it could affect their asset creditworthiness. That makes it harder for them to borrow money, which could lead to higher interest rates. For everyone, think mortgages, credit cards, it could hit your wallet directly.
Okay, now I'm really starting to see how this could get complicated. So we've got this potential fund, ways to potentially fill it, and possible benefits and risks for both investors and the government. But there's one thing that really jumped out at me in the research. Remember how the president is considering abolishing the income tax? What would that do to this whole sovereign wealth fund idea?
Now that throws a real wrench into the works. Eliminating the income tax would shrink the government's income stream big time. And remember, one of the ways they were thinking about funding this whole thing was with tariff revenue, which was also being eyed for those tax breaks.
Right, that funding puzzle we talked about. So no more income tax. Does
Yeah.
that mean no sovereign wealth fund?
Not necessarily. It would definitely make it a lot harder to get the money, but it's not impossible. Remember the other way they were talking about getting the cash, selling off those government assets. They could potentially ramp up that whole process to make up for the lost income tax revenue.
So instead of using extra money, they'd be relying even more on selling off what they already own
Yeah,
to fuel those future investments.
exactly. And that opens up a whole new can of worms. How much land are they willing to sell?
Mhm.
What does that mean for things like conservation efforts, public access to those lands, the environment? There are no easy answers here.
It feels like we're stepping into uncharted territory. A sovereign wealth fund in a country with a big pile of debt and no guaranteed surplus revenue stream. That's never been done before.
It's a completely unique situation, and it really highlights why critical thinking is so important. For you, don't just take the headlines at face value. Dig deeper. Think about the potential consequences, both good and bad, and form your own informed opinion.
That's great advice. It's so easy to get caught up in all the hype or doom scrolling these days. But taking a step back and really analyzing things is crucial.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
When it comes to something as potentially impactful as a U.S. sovereign wealth fund, thinking critically is key to understanding how this whole thing might affect your life.
We've covered a lot of ground here, funding investment strategies, risks. But for you listening, what are the key takeaways?
First and foremost, the creation of a U.S. sovereign wealth fund is a big deal, with the potential to reach every corner of the economy. It could boost things and create new opportunities, but it also comes with a whole set of risks, both for the government and for individual investors.
Right, it's not a guaranteed win for anyone. There are definitely downsides to consider.
Absolutely. Second, this situation highlights how important it is to understand basic economics, things like supply and demand, how assets are valued, and the impact of government debt on things like interest rates.
So maybe it's time to dust off those old Econ 101 notes.
Not a bad idea. And finally, this really emphasizes the need for what I call informed skepticism. Don't just believe everything you hear, even if it comes from a seemingly reliable source. Do your research, question assumptions, and think critically about the potential consequences, both the good and the bad.
That's so important, especially in today's world where we're constantly bombarded with information. Developing that critical thinking muscle is more important than ever.
Couldn't agree more. This deep dive has really highlighted the complex nature of this issue. And there's still a lot we don't know, but by arming yourself with knowledge and a good dose of skepticism, you'll be better equipped to navigate this ever-changing landscape and make informed decisions that work for you and your financial future.
Well said. And that brings us to the end of another deep dive. But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. We've talked about the risks if the sovereign wealth fund loses money. But what about the flip side?
You mean if the investments
Yeah,
actually do well?
exactly. What if they make a killing? What happens to all that profit? Does it go back to the government? Is it used to pay down the national debt? Or could it even be distributed directly to the citizens?
That's a question worth pondering. The answer could have a huge impact on the U.S. economy and your personal finances. So I encourage you to keep exploring this topic and see where you're on.
Critical thinking takes you.
Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Imagine like a scenario where the government's
Out there like making savvy investments, bringing in huge returns, and makes you think about the role of government in a whole new light.
It really does. Think about it. If the government becomes this like investing powerhouse, how does that change things? It raises questions about the distribution of wealth, maybe even the future of capitalism itself.
It's like we're on the verge of a whole new economic era. And like you said, we can't just sit back and let the government figure it all out without our input. This is something that affects all of us.
Exactly. We need to understand the potential consequences, the upsides and the downsides, and make our voices heard.
I think this deep dive has given our listeners a lot to think about. We've covered the basics of sovereign wealth funds, how they might be funded, and the potential impact on both everyday investors and the government itself.
And we've only scratched the surface. There are so many layers to this. It could unfold in so many different ways.
It really does feel like we're standing at a crossroads. The decisions made today could shape the U.S. economy for generations to come.
So keep digging into this topic. Read articles, listen to other podcasts, talk to people about it. The more we all understand, the better equipped we'll be to navigate this uncharted territory.
I couldn't agree more. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and keep asking those tough questions.